This is a Solid Signal podcast for the week of July 17th, 2023. And the subject for this week is that I'm beginning to hate USB. It's taken a good long time, so that says an awful lot about how good USB is, because it's been about 25 years that I've been working with USB, and I'm only now beginning to hate it. That's actually a pretty good record if you think about it. Let me tell you a story, and it's an interesting story because it's a story about something that we sell at solidsignal.com. If you've been listening to this podcast and reading the Solid Signal blog, I hope that you do, by the way. You know that a while back I got my hands on a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K camera. Now, I really like this camera a lot. This is hands down the best camera I've ever used, and I've used a lot of broadcast quality equipment. It's reasonably small, it's reasonably light, it's not only easy to use, but it's also got more settings than you could possibly ever want. But I will say that there is kind of a limitation to it. I wouldn't call this a true limitation, it's just something that you need to know. You can record in Blackmagic RAW format, top quality, in 6K, and if you do that, you're going to be recording about 30 gigabytes a minute. 30 gigabytes. So in other words, you're recording the equivalent of an entire Blu-ray disc about every minute and 10 seconds. You're recording the contents of an entire DVD, well, probably in less than the time it takes me to say DVD. It just uses a lot of storage. And for that reason, you always want to have a lot of storage available. And it's good. I mean, you can put in CFast cards, and if you're not familiar with CFast cards, they're an evolution of the compact flash standard that is just insanely fast. Or my favorite feature of all of this camera is that you can hook up a USB hard drive to it. But that hard drive had better be capable of keeping up. And if not, then the camera's just going to stop working. Mechanical hard drives are out of the question. There's no way that they could keep up fast enough. But a lot of SSDs are fast enough. And so that's what I tend to use is SSDs. And it's nice that you can take the hard drive right off of the camera and hook it straight into a computer and edit straight from it, which is really cool. It does mean that your SSDs kind of stay in like permanent storage mode if you keep your raw stuff. But that's okay because SSDs are getting pretty darn cheap now. But I had another idea based on some stuff that I had laying around. You might be familiar with what's called NVMe hard drives. These are the kind of the new standard in solid state drives that power most laptops now. And the NVMe hard drive is a little tiny thing about the size of a stick of gum. And it can hold, I think they have 4 terabyte ones now, whatever. And they record insanely fast. So fast that there is no way that I would need to worry about the Blackmagic camera outpacing the hard drive. It would just kind of work. So I had one of these drives, which was fast enough. Definitely met the Blackmagic standards. And then I had an enclosure, which the enclosures for these things kind of look, a little bit like a larger pack of gum. And then you put the little tiny hard drive in it, and then you connect it to USB, and you format it, and it works. Except in this case, it didn't. The hard drive works great when I connect it to my laptop. It works when I connect it to other devices. And it didn't work at all when I connected it to the Blackmagic camera. And so I had to find out why. Because I'm just the kind of person who has to find out why on this stuff. And I did a little bit of research, and I found that the Blackmagic camera will only support hard drives that meet the USB 3.1 Generation 1 standard, which means most solid-state drives and 0 NVMe enclosures. I was not able to find a single enclosure that met that standard on any place that I looked, on any site. And I mean, I haven't looked the entire internet, and I haven't gone back to like auction sites or stuff like that where they might have older stock, but still, I was not able to find anything like that. And I began to kind of do a little bit more research. I mean, USB 3.1 Generation 2 is kind of the minimum standard now, and that's really not too different from Generation 1, except for it enables the use of power over the the USB-C connector in different ways or something like that. The point is it's a little bit different. And then USB 3.1 Generation 2 is different from USB 3.2, which is different from USB 4.0, which is a largely theoretical standard right now that you'll probably hear an awful lot more about. It's not so much important that these are different and what the differences are. It's more that you know that you could have one device that meets one standard and one device that meets another one, and you'd have really no way of knowing. They've given up on even labeling the things to say what they support. I don't blame them either, because, I mean, the names have gotten ridiculous. It started with USB 3.0, then USB 3.1, and then USB 3.1 Generation 2, and Generation 1 became kind of what they call a retronym. You used to call just 3.1, then it became 3.1 Generation 1, and then USB 3.2, and most of these things use the same plug. They either use the Type A or Type C connector, and they're pretty much interchangeable unless the device doesn't support it. Like I said, the Blackmagic camera didn't support it. A little bit of research said that yes, it would be technically possible to tell the camera to put itself into some sort of compatibility mode or something like that, but they didn't do it, and that's just the fact. They didn't do it. I think that the newer Blackmagic cameras, the ones that you're going to get now, don't have this problem, but the one that I do does. And still, that's not really the focus of this particular podcast, even though I've gone on for about 6 minutes about it. The point is that USB came out in the mid-1990s, and it was a replacement for some gigantic looking cables that just didn't make a lot of sense. The idea was one cable, you could split it off easily using hubs, it would provide a small amount of power for keyboards and mice, stuff like that. And it would just be something that would work. You'd plug it in, and combined with some support from the operating system, it would just work. And it did for a long time. USB 1 devices talked nicely to USB 2 devices. Even when USB 3 devices came out, they would automatically step down to USB 2 mode. It really wasn't that hard. Yeah, they started monkeying with connectors. That's where the beginning of the problem happened, because they had mini USB, which nobody liked, and that was just too easy to smush. Micro USB, which was even worse. Micro USB is the only connector I have ever found that consistently you have to plug it in 3 times before you have it right. You'll plug it in, and it won't fit. And then you'll turn it upside down, and it still won't fit. And then you'll look real hard at it, and you'll plug it back in the first way, and all of a sudden it'll fit. This happens all the time with micro USB. Finally, you got USB Type-C, the connector we're familiar with. If you've got an Android phone, it's the connector that's on your phone. If you've got an iPhone, better get familiar, because it's going to be the connector on the next phone. And that's a great thing, USB Type-C. The plug is great. What's going on with the plug is turning into a holy mess, because in addition to using the same connector for a USB 3.1 Gen 2, USB 3.2, USB 4.0, and if that wasn't bad enough, then also the Thunderbolt standard, which is something that Apple came up with and very few other people support, also works on USB C, and it's completely incompatible with everything else. And so this one lowly plug gives you no idea what it's doing and what it's good for and what it's not good for. It just kind of works. Then, on top of which, somebody had the great idea that, okay, what they're going to do is allow USB-C to carry voltage. Now, that's never been a bad idea, and it's always been part of the USB standard since the very beginning. But now you can power a monitor. You can run like 100 watts or some ridiculous number off a USB-C, which is great as long as it doesn't accidentally fry something that's not expecting it. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't do that, because there's some sort of negotiation that takes place where it doesn't actually supply that level of power unless it knows that the thing can take it. There has to be a positive result saying that the thing can definitely take it. Still, you know that somehow this is going to be used the wrong way. Somebody's going to get hurt. There's going to be a lawsuit. And all of a sudden, after that, there are going to be gigantic warning labels that we can't take off of things. I can just see it happening. So in our quest to make USB even better, we have made it more and more and more confusing, to the extent that now when you have USB-C, you don't know if the device that you're plugging it into will support this or that or the other thing, how much power it will, how much power it won't. how fast it will go, how fast it will not go, and whether or not it will be supported by everything. Which, by the way, is exactly the problem that USB was supposed to solve when it started all out with this stuff. It was supposed to be something where you could just confidently plug it in and it worked. Now, at last count, there's about 7 different kinds of connectors. Even though the Type-C connector is the most popular one, it doesn't mean you won't see the other ones, because you will, and that's just, it's going to be a long time but before we can really ever be done with those. Maybe another 10 years, who knows? And so you're still going to have adapters for these things, and it's a mess. What's the solution? I don't know. Is it time to start over with a different connector? Well, maybe. There are some problems with the Type-C connector. I don't like it as much as I like the Lightning connector. It's bigger. There's a place that dirt can kind of get in and kind of break it. There's a lot that's good about this connector, but also an equal amount that's bad. And so maybe what we need to do is start with a new connector that is designed for the 2020s and beyond, because remember, USB was designed for the 1990s. And I'd say it's had an excellent run, but maybe it's time to come up with a connector that really just works the way that it should work. It's going to be confusing at first, but it's going to be good when it's finally all finished and shaken out. The real question is, of course, will I be retired or even alive by then? Who knows? That's about it for the Solid Signal podcast. I hope you enjoyed this rant-filled podcast. It's slightly on topic because, remember, solidsignal.com does sell cables and connectors, everything that you need to live your best digital life. And you should call us at 888-233-7563 if you have any questions about that kind of thing or any other project that you have going on. Do me a favor, like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you get this podcast. Makes me look good to my bosses, and I will be back next week with another podcast full of, well, just who knows what.